Welcome to our TV show, featuring documentaries revealing the realities behind myths, using research and scholarship. I'm your host, Ergün Kırlıkovalı, and I will be with you every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to send me your feedback at #ethocide. Repeat, #ethocide. The month of April is awash with Armenian propaganda, misrepresenting the history of late 19th and early 20th Ottoman Empire. At the heart of malicious Armenian efforts is the desire to defame Turks and have the long discredited political claim of Armenian genocide recognized as the whole truth. They ignore the armed Armenian rebellions, terrorism, treason, territorial demands, and the suffering of the Muslims, mostly Turks, at the hands of Armenian revolutionaries. And to the remainder of the story, they inject heavy doses of hearsay, forgeries, and embellishments, and present it to the unsuspecting public as genocide. The Armenian lobby, unfortunately, finds fertile grounds for their distortions in the ethno-religious bias against Muslims in general and Turks in particular. The Armenian lobby coerced the politicians to pass baseless and insulting Armenian demands as political resolutions. The Armenian lobby causes millions of US dollars, hard-earned US taxpayers' money, to be squandered every year under the cover of humanitarian aid to Armenia. Armenia is a landlocked, poverty-stricken, violence-plagued, warmongering, and corrupt country where the top two imports are foreign aid and Russian arms, and the top two exports are terrorism and fraud. Armenia is a client state of Russia where Russians pretty much own everything, from energy to telecommunications. Russians run Armenia through Armenian proxies as if it was a provincial Russian outpost. Thus, the US taxpayer finds itself, ironically, in this bizarre role of financing the number one enemy of the US, Russia, through Armenia, a Russian project. Armenia had illegally occupied 20% of Azerbaijan using Russian armaments, military advisors, and unspeakable cruelty. Armenian army and irregulars expelled at gunpoint 1 million Azerbaijanis from their homes. After 27 years of illegal occupation and fruitless peace talks at the inept and reluctant OSCE Minsk group, Azerbaijan finally liberated its homeland from cruel foreign occupiers after a 44-day epic war last autumn. Armenia sells the US arms to Iran. The Guardian article titled US Fury at Armenia over arms transfers to Iran, dated November 28, 2010, revealed that Armenia enabled Iran's purchase of rockets and machine guns in 2003. 4 years later, in 2007, some of these weapons were recovered in Iraq from 2 Shia militants, in which a US soldier was killed and 6 others were injured. The US expressed its deep concerns in a letter to Armenian President Sargsyan about Armenians' transfer of arms to Iran, resulting in the deaths of US soldier in Iraq. The letter said, I quote, "Neither the US administration nor the US Congress can overlook this case. By law, the transfer of these weapons requires the US to consider whether there is a basis for the imposition of US sanctions to Armenia. If sanctions are imposed, penalties could include the cutoff of US assistance and certain export restrictions to Armenia." Unquote. 13 years later, after this event, totally disregarding Armenians' war crimes, the nagging and dishonest Armenian lobby are asking President Biden to recognize a proven fallacy as genocide. Perhaps the biggest blow to the Armenian lobby and its flawed narrative came from Europe. The European Court of Human Rights issued a milestone verdict on October 15, 2015, that will resonate for decades to come. The ECHR's Grand Chamber ruled that Armenian genocide is an opinion, not a court verdict. As such, it can be rejected, and that rejection would be an exercise in free speech. Thus, it was determined by the highest court in Europe that refuting and rejecting the alleged Armenian genocide was not a hate speech, as the deceptive Armenian lobby claims, but it was mere free speech. ECHR Grand Chamber verdicts are final. They cannot be appealed. The ECHR further ruled that the alleged Armenian genocide could not be compared to the court-proven Holocaust. The latter had gone through the due process of legal scrutiny at a competent tribunal, and the intent was documented and proven. Remember the Nuremberg verdict of October 1st, 1946? On the history front, the inherently flawed Armenian narrative is scholarly refuted in no uncertain terms. A formidable array of prominent historians, scholars, researchers, and experts in history of the Ottoman Empire disputed the Armenian allegations of genocide. Here's what 69 of them said in a public statement that was published in the New York Times and Washington Post on May 19, 1985. I quote, As for the charge of genocide, no signatory of this statement wishes to minimize the scope of Armenian suffering. We are likewise cognizant that it cannot be viewed as separate from the suffering experienced by the Muslim inhabitants of the region. The weight of evidence so far uncovered points in the direction of serious intercommunal warfare perpetrated by Muslim and Christian irregular forces, complicated by disease, famine, suffering, and massacres in Anatolia and adjoining areas during the First World War. Statesmen and politicians make history, and scholars write it. For this process to work, scholars must be given total access to written records of the statesmen and politicians of the past, unquote. To date, the relevant archives in Turkey are open, and more than 100 countries have already sent their scholars there to do research, except Armenia. Armenian archives are still closed. Limited access is only given to those who subscribe to the official Armenian narrative. So, what are the Armenians afraid of? What information is in there that could destroy the Armenian image and flawed narrative? Against this backdrop, let's now turn our attention to the calls to the US President Joe Biden to recognize the long discredited political claim as Armenian genocide on April 24th, 2021. Will Biden heed those calls and recognize a false genocide? Biden has been in politics for most of his adult life, having been elected to both the US House of Representatives and later to the US Senate. Then he served 2 terms as vice president under President Obama. During all these years, Biden made it clear that he was a Philhellene and Armenophile. He voted for genocide recognition in the past and pledged in 2020 to do so again if elected president. If Biden's voting record is any guide, Biden will probably take the misleading Armenian accusations at face value and call a proven fallacy a genocide. Some argue that being a president of the most powerful country on earth is drastically different than being a candidate. When a candidate becomes president, he's quickly reminded to put American interests before ethnic interests. They cite Presidents Obama, son Bush, Clinton, and Father Bush, among others, who put the US-Turkey relations ahead of the pesky Armenian demands. Turkey is a valued NATO member with the second largest and battle-hardened army. Turkey has been a stalwart and reliable ally of the US for more than 70 years. Turks fought bravely, shoulder to shoulder with Americans in Korea against communist aggression, and were awarded the US Congressional Medal for their valor. Turks also fought alongside the US soldiers against terrorism in Afghanistan, against ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, against sectarianism in Somalia, and against other evils elsewhere. Turkey is a strategic partner for the US in the troubled Middle East, Eastern Mediterranean, Northern Africa, the Caucasus, the Balkans, and beyond. Turkey sits on arguably the single most important geography in the world. Surrounded by 3 seas and strategic waterways and channels, Turkey's most celebrated piece of land, earth, anywhere. 3 continents meet, East and West hug, monotheist religions flourish, some 30 civilizations overlap, the earliest human settlements and innovations for millenniums take root, ancient Silk routes crisscross, today's energy corridors find a hub, and more. Recognizing the flawed Armenian narrative as genocide would be offensive to Turkey. Insulting and angering Turkey would not contribute to improving US-Turkey relations. A disappointed, dismayed, and incensed Turkey may be compelled to reconsider the US's reliability as an ally and may move closer to Eurasian alliance, slowly disengaging from US's insults, threats, sanctions, embargoes, and schemes, almost all of which initiated by the deceiving and racist Armenian and Greek lobbies. It is true that there are other issues between the US and Turkey. The S-400 missile system Turkey bought from Russia in 2018, because the US would not sell Patriots for political reasons or by unfavorable terms and conditions. Turkey says these missiles will not be a part of NATO system, will not interfere with the Western defense. So concerns over Russian access to NATO information are misplaced. Turkey needs this missile defense system against Syria and Iran, as NATO provides no missile protection in eastern half of Turkey. Turkey suggests formation of a blue ribbon technical investigation committee to evaluate competing claims. I, for one, find this proposal to be reasonable and fair. Then, of course, there's the issue of Fethullah Gulen, a primary school educated cleric calling Pennsylvania home for the last quarter of a century. Fethullah Gulen is wanted in Turkey for engineering the 2016 coup, where more than 250 innocent civilians lost their lives. There's an extradition agreement between the US and Turkey, so such a request normally should not be a problem. The US says it is not convinced that Fethullah Gulen is behind the coup. Turkey had sent many reams of documents connecting Fethullah Gulen to the coup, but the US remains unconvinced. The real reason for not extraditing Fethullah Gulen may be FG's alleged ties to CIA. It is contended that if the US turns FG over to Turkey, the role that the US played in that coup may be exposed. Others reject this claim as baseless conspiracy theory. Be that as it may, if Biden uses the G word on April 24th, he will be adding insult to injury. Whether that tips the scale in the US-Turkish relations remains to be seen. At best, we can see deep freeze descending upon the US-Turkey relations. At worst, we may see a huge black hole appearing in Biden's world map where Turkey is and its surroundings are. We have the Armenian lobby to blame for that black hole where the American interests may no longer be welcome. I can see major newspapers publishing editorials asking, who lost Turkey? Well, our president did. Our Congress did. Our media did. We all did. The choices we made were not smart. Appeasing the nagging and dishonest Armenian lobby by taking their flawed narrative at face value should not have been more important than keeping the friendship and trust of a powerful, resourceful, and influential ally for 70 plus years. This country is built on lands owned by the Native Americans. Has any president recognized the Trail of Tears of 1830 and many other cases as acts of genocide? Has any resolution been passed in the US Congress to condemn countless cases of America's inhumanity to Native Americans? There was slavery in this country for centuries, victimizing generations of African Americans. Has any president recognized the many centuries of bondage and torture and rapes and massacres and persecution as genocide? Has any resolution been passed in the US Congress to condemn America's inhumanity to African Americans? Asians were discriminated against and persecuted. Hispanics were discriminated against and persecuted. Jews were discriminated against and persecuted. Catholics were discriminated against and persecuted. Did you recognize any of these as genocide, President Biden? Has any president recognized the many centuries of America's inhumanity to these groups as genocide? Has any resolution been passed in the US Congress to condemn America's cruelty and mercilessness to all these ethnicities and religious groups? Some 8 million people were massacred in Congo between 1886 and 1908. Millions of Ukrainian people and others perished in the Holodomor and the Stalin purges of the 1930s. There are countless cases in history. Hereros, Namas persecuted by Germans, Algerians persecuted by the French, Cambodians, Ethiopians, Uyghurs, natives of Brazil, Australia, Canada, Paraguay, Guatemala, on and on. A list too long to list here. That shows men's inhumanity to men, and they may fit the description of genocide better. Has any president recognized any of these? Has any resolution been passed in the US Congress to condemn them as genocide? Why then pick with tweezers out of a complex web of suffering that includes Turks, Kurds, Arabs, Circassians, Jews, and others, only the Armenian suffering? Why such selective morality? Why such hypocrisy? Why divide and polarize Americans on the basis of ethnicity and or religion with a one-sided view of history? You think the White House is an institution to adjudicate genocide disputes? Do you think the US Congress is? Or the media, academia, clergy, activists, or other groups? No, Mr. President, none of them can judge what event in history is genocide and what is not. There is one and only one institution in the whole world that can do that: the International Court of Justice. The United Nations established the ICJ as a specialized court just for this purpose. Only cases after 1951 can be tried in this place. Examples are the Holocaust, Rwanda, and Srebrenica. All are proven to be genocide. In case you're tempted to use the fabricated Hitler quote in your letter, Mr. President, let me warn you now. Please be advised that the statement has never been authenticated, was not admitted into evidence during the Nuremberg tribunals. It was the creation of Berlin bureau chief of Associated Press, Lochner, an overzealous Armenophile. Lochner slipped the note to a US prosecutor. Thanks to the vigilance of the prosecutor, it was determined that the two authenticated Hitler speeches made on August 22nd, 1939, as found among the captured documents at OKW, the Nazi equivalent of our Pentagon, made absolutely no reference to Armenians. It is phony. Perhaps the most compelling reason for rejecting the use of the G word in a presidential letter is that such a statement would be unconstitutional. The First Amendment prohibits government action motivated in whole or in part by viewpoint hostility. Evidence shows that a notable motivation for presidential recognition is hostility towards viewpoints that dispute the Armenian genocide claim. Such viewpoint discrimination constitutes a violation of the First Amendment, Mr. President. The presidential declaration is further unconstitutional because it will serve to demonize Turkish Americans as genocide deniers, which in turn will likely incite violence against Turkish Americans. A purpose to harm a politically vulnerable group violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, Mr. President. For more on Armenian terrorism, a plague with us for 160 years, please see Myths and Realities, this show, episode number 1. The threat of increased Armenian threats, intimidation, violence, and terrorism victimizing Turkish Americans and Azerbaijan Americans due to a presidential recognition of a genocide is very real. Genocide was not recognized as a crime until the Genocide Convention of 1948, which entered into force on January 12, 1951. The universal prohibition on ex post facto laws would bar any genocide prosecution retroactively, as Article 24 of the Rome Statute of International Criminal Court states clearly. In short, the Armenian claims of genocide fail on all counts: history scholarship, letter and spirit of law, legal verdicts, the US Constitution, democracy, safety, equality, ethics, fiduciary, peace, and more. I urge you, Mr. President, to put American interests before Armenian ones and refrain from using the G word on April 24th. Don't divide and polarize us. Unite and heal us. Don't reward dishonest and racist Armenian claims of genocide. Reward research, dialogue, and peace. I make this request in the exercise of my free First Amendment right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Will Mr. President Biden say yes to the G word? Will the US-Turkey relations sour further? What are the future trends? Well, those are great discussions for future episodes. Thank you for joining me. See you next week.